Now, China's annual Two Sessions comes to a close on Thursday, a key annual event on Beijing's political calendar, gathering the National People's Congress and its top political advisory body, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. The Two Sessions usually set out the government's major economic and political goals. In addition to Beijing's new 5-year economic roadmap, which we discussed earlier this week, observers also looked out for political cues on how and to what extent China aims to expand its influence in the world, and most critically, how it will manage relations with a new US administration under President Joe Biden. For this, we connect with J. James Kim, Senior Research Fellow at the Arirang Institute for Policy Studies. We also welcome back Joseph Bosco, former China Country Director in the US Office of the Secretary of Defense. A very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us again. And, well, if it's okay with you, James, let's start with you first. So, in the past, China has said that it's not interested in becoming a superpower. But recently, Beijing officials have increasingly been mentioning the idea of coexistence as a major power with the United States. And from what you've observed during this year's Two Sessions, what really stood out to you, and what do you think we can really take home about China's foreign policy ambitions and how it intends to address its rivalry with Washington?
Thanks for having me, Soo-young. And I think you're right to the extent that China in the past has not expressed an interest in being a superpower. But I think China is also changing over time. And what I sense based on these meetings is that, there's greater confidence being expressed. Two items in particular seems to reflect some of this. One is the overhaul of the Hong Kong's electoral system. China shows absolutely no intention to give an inch to outside criticism of its policies on Hong Kong. This also has implications for Taiwan as well. And second is that the Chinese government has expressed sort of a defiant tone over US pressure on China's technology. And the concept that the CCP leadership has been using more frequently on this topic is dual circulation, which means reliance on domestic suppliers and consumers. And I think here the statement that CCP is making is that it will insulate its technology sector from US pressure. And the implication of this, obviously, is that we're going to get, eventually, get a completion of technology sectoral decoupling between the United States and China.
Right, so China not really hiding its ambitions anymore, but becoming growingly assertive. And, well, Joe, now I want to hear your opinion on this as well. I mean, of course, this year's Two Sessions, it fell on the Communist Party's centenary this year, with Xi Jinping's leadership still intact. What did you find significant about the Two Sessions, particularly in regard to Beijing's conflict with Washington?
I think Dr. Kim summed up the situation very, very well, and I certainly agree with everything he said. And it's nice to be with you again, I should say, Soo-young. I think that if I were to define or describe the meeting in one word, it would be defiance. I think that the Chinese Communist Party is sending a message to the Biden administration and to the world generally that it does not intend to back down, as Dr. Kim said, on Hong Kong or on Taiwan or on technology or on many, many other issues. At least that's what it states, and that may be what it believes now. What it will actually do will depend on what the Biden administration does. I think Beijing has made it clear that it was very unhappy with the way the Trump administration relationship emerged over the 4 years. They originally thought they would have an easy time with Donald Trump. They did in some ways have such an easy time, but the entire Trump administration was quite different from the so-called friendship between Xi and Trump. And the administration at the State Department, the Defense Department, the National Security Council took a very, very firm stand against China on a range of issues: security and cyber and technology, human rights. And they were Beijing was very, very unhappy with that posture, obviously, and looked forward to a Biden administration that they thought and hoped would be a reversion to the Obama years. And so far, they have not seen that kind of a response from the Biden team. So it remains to be seen how firmly they will be treated, and that will affect how they, in fact, act themselves.
And Joe, now at the two sessions, an expression promoting China's reunification with Taiwan appeared for the second year in a row at this year's two sessions. And in 2019, the expression was actually China's peaceful reunification, so they removed the word peaceful. And Chinese media Global Times said that there are discussions on making a new legislation for national reunification. And also, in addition to Taiwan, officials also unveiled proposals to introduce major changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. So a lot more assertiveness, as you said, and defiance in, as you said, I suppose. Do you think we're going to see China's claims get more and more aggressive and possibly turn into aggressive actions?
At the moment, I would say yes, but I think we're still in a testing period. I think they will become more aggressive, hoping and expecting that the Biden administration will back down or will soften its tone and call for talks and somehow try to accommodate China to avoid any kind of a real conflict. If they get that kind of a result, then I think they might back off and start working with U.S. administration on a softer, more diplomatic approach. If in fact the Biden administration pushes back on the aggressive moves of Beijing, then I think Beijing will escalate, at least at the first level, to see if they can then get the Biden administration to back off. Otherwise, if neither side backs off, obviously, we're in a potential conflict situation. And that's where the signaling from the Biden administration has got to be very clear and very firm so that China understands if it really does pursue these objectives in as aggressive a manner as it is saying it will, they are going to find themselves in a conflict with the U.S., which I don't think they really want. I think they want to achieve their goals peacefully if they can.
So, James, US President Joe Biden, he has been expressing greater concern about Beijing's grip on Hong Kong, human rights abuses, and its very assertive actions in the region, including towards Taiwan. And there does seem to be some international backing behind this. There have been calls for a boycott of China's participation in the Tokyo Olympics, for instance. But of course, when asked about all this, China's State Councillor Wang Yi, he called all of these accusations baseless and smears against Beijing. Do you think Joe Biden is going to stay firm on these human rights issues? And do you think that China is going to back down at all? Or do you think she's probably going to just sit and try and wait this out?
So I think Joe is definitely right. And it's still an open question to an extent, because that's how Beijing sees it, about how Biden is going to follow through on these kinds of issues. And whenever these issues come up, Joe Biden needs to answer them. And he's expressed his commitment to stay firm and focused on this issue. And what he needs to do now is to show a steady hand and maybe even follow through with some action to back up his words. And we need some strong actions. We need sanctions, and we need actual follow through on those sanctions. We need to see these words be coupled with a strong stance and some real action by Washington.
And James, it seems that Beijing tried to get a head start on engaging America's allies, sealing the RCEP Pact, for instance, that strengthens its economic ties with numerous other countries, including Japan, and also an investment deal with the EU. And China's also been increasing its clout in global institutions in recent years. Is it going to be easy for Mr. Biden to actually round up multilateral efforts against Chinese behavior?
I think Beijing's been engaging U.S. allies for some time now, and they've been more successful in some cases than others. The Biden administration does have its hands full, and I think the approach will be to begin prioritizing. And I think the momentum will follow the path of least resistance. You can think about this in two ways. one way is, where he can get more cooperation and traction, he'll move more swiftly on some of these issues. And these are areas like climate change, multilateral trade. He may be more challenged in the areas of security cooperation because of a lot of tools that China has at its disposal, including economic coercion, which we've experienced here in South Korea. So he'll need to put more emphasis on those partners that are more forthcoming on that front. And so far, countries like Australia, Japan, India, even New Zealand has shown or signaled their interest in cooperating more extensively with the U.S. On the security front with China. South Korea obviously has to work out the pluses and the minuses about how much to get involved in these security issues. And I think that's the question that the current administration in Seoul is trying to answer.
And Joe, in the meantime, China, during the two sessions, it unveiled its plans to boost spending in R&D by 2%, as well as increasing its defense expenditure. And Xi Jinping actually said that the Chinese military must be prepared to respond to what he called complex and difficult situations as the country grapples with security challenges. And the country is aiming to be a top military power by 2050. Do you think the US is just as prepared to ramp up its technology and national security interests? And there's also talk of imposing very narrowly targeted measures to decouple from the Chinese economy and protect US security interests. But is that enough, do you think?
No, I think it's probably not enough as long as China keeps expanding its aggressive moves and increasing its defense spending. The US will have to respond in kind. It's kind of ironic when one thinks about China talks about defense needs and security needs as if it is being threatened by any power outside China. There's no one on China's periphery that has any intention of attacking or invading China, nor does the United States, nor do European countries. There's simply no external threat. This entire buildup of its military capabilities is in the aggressive offensive vein, not a defensive measure. When China is confronted with that question, it says that, well, it's a major industrial power and therefore it needs to have a military commensurate with that capacity. And yet at the United Nations or the World Bank or international financial institutions, China takes the posture that it's a developing country. It needs to have special treatment because it's not in the same league with the United States and other major powers. So there's a real inherent contradiction there. All of it, though, fits in with a posture that is, one can have to describe it as aggressive, both in terms of its capabilities and its intentions. No longer does it follow Deng Xiaoping's admonition to hide your capabilities and bide your time. Now Xi Jinping feels and acts as if the time is now to act aggressively and assertively in the region and even globally. So the world has a problem on its hands with China under its present leadership, but it's not just a function of Xi Jinping. It's a matter of the Communist Party's ideology and its ambitions in the region and worldwide.
And James, well, as tensions between the US and China intensified over the years, America's allied countries were under an immense amount of pressure to choose sides. And do you think now going forward, these allied countries will perhaps maybe become more assertive or have a choice of picking and choosing as they try to balance these two massive powers?
I kind of addressed this in the last question you asked me about this issue. Where Joe Biden can expect more fruitful outcomes when it comes to cooperation from its allies. and some allies may be less keen on cooperating on certain kinds of issues like human rights and democracy. And I could think of some countries that are potential partners in Southeast Asia, for instance, but still see China as a threat. And we're looking at countries like Vietnam, and I'm thinking about these kinds of countries. They may not be so interested in cooperating on these kinds of universal values related issues. Security cooperation, specifically targeting China, may have limited audience given the countermeasures and pressure tactics that Beijing may be able to level against other countries that are cooperating with the U.S. On these matters. So it's going to be a mixed bag, if you ask me, and it's going to be somewhat spotty. In some areas, you're going to see a lot of cooperation. In some areas, you may not see as much cooperation as you'd like. And you're going to have to just roll with what you've got for the time being, for the next 4 years until the next election.
Well, as we see China and the US sort of cautiously squaring up to each other, their top officials are expected to meet in Alaska next Thursday, and we don't know what they're going to talk about. Well, they have lots to talk about, I imagine, but we'll have to wait and see what goes on or what comes out of that meeting, I suppose. This is where we have to end the discussion today. That was James Kim, Senior Research Fellow for the Arirang Institute for Policy Studies here in Seoul, and Joseph Bosco, former China Country Director in the US Office of the Secretary of Defense. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.